Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. My guest today is Philip Holt. He is currently a Senior Vice President of Operational Excellence at GKN Aerospace, which is the world's leading multi-technology Tier 1 aerospace supplier. And Philip has more than 30 years of business experience in different leadership roles spanning the customer value chain. He's been in other industry-leading companies, including Philips, Gillette, and Travelport. Philip studied at Manchester Metropolitan University, Warwick Business School, and the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School. So he's a regular speaker at Lean, Six Sigma, and operational excellence conferences. So before I tell you a little bit more, and before I tell you about his books that'll form kind of the basis for our conversation today, first off, Philip, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Mark, and thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm glad we can talk, and I've already alluded to the UK, and people can tell where. But I'll ask, where are you located these days?
So I'm located in a small market town called Bury St Edmunds. It's just to the east of Cambridge, which listeners are probably more familiar with. But my accent betrays the fact that I'm actually from the north of England originally, so I'm from the Manchester area. But it's an accent that's followed me around wherever I've lived.
Yeah. Well, it's when I've worked in the UK, I always thought, boy, things sound smarter in a British accent. And they may have been just teasing me when they claimed maybe the opposite was also true. There's something about not being a prophet in your own land, perhaps, but that's a different story.
Absolutely.
So Philip Holt, again, his website is lean-master.com. I'll make sure there's a link to that in the show notes. And I'll put a link to his 3 lean leadership books. So the first book was titled Leading with Lean, an experience-based guide to leading a lean transformation. Sorry for the defect there, Philip. The second book was The Simplicity of Lean, Defeating Complexity, Delivering Excellence. And the third book is Leading Lean by Living Lean, Changing How You Lean, Not Who You Are. Did I have a typo there? Is that a different defect? Is it changing how? No, I said it wrong again. My goodness. Changing how you lean. This is okay.
It's actually changing how you lead, not who you are.
That's the typo. My goodness. Yes. I am full of defects and mistakes, and I did not do it right the first time. But in the spirit of leading a lean life, which we're going to come back and talk to, I'm going to not edit out those mistakes. That we're all human, and that's a part of being a lean leader, I guess, is recognizing that.
Absolutely.
So we'll get to take a deeper dive into all of that. I will quit stumbling through my attempts to read things here. But Philip, before we talk about the books and the things you've learned along the way, how did your lean journey, if you will, start off? I like asking guests. I think it's always interesting to hear the origin story for you, kind of the how, the where, the when. Did you get exposed to any of this?
Yeah, so it's kind of in 2 parts. The first part I always describe as the part where I thought I knew what lean was, and the second part was when I realized I didn't and started to learn it again. So the first part was when, I think like a lot of people, I was running operations in a company, one of my first company I worked for. I started to pick up books. I read The Machine That Changed the World, looking at total quality management, all the good stuff of the late 80s and 90s, and started to use the toolkit. I got during the 90s a Six Sigma green belt as well, and felt that I had a really good grasp of the lean and the Six Sigma toolkit, and ran some projects where we had significant results and people were happy, senior leadership was happy. But one thing that started to dawn on me on reflection was that there was a lot of deterioration after the fact, and also it was very difficult to see the overall improvement in the overall value chain. And I didn't really realize why that was until in 2008, I joined what we called the Simply Philips lean operating model in Philips. It was essentially a reboot of the lean program using a 5-phase lean operating deployment model. And I was fortunate enough, we went over to Japan for 2 weeks to do what we call the Kaikaku experience, a best practice experience. And it was whilst I was out there, it really started to dawn on me that I'd completely missed what lean was all about, what lean leadership was all about. And it became clear to me that, the tools are exactly as we call them, the tools. And it's not about the tools. The tools are relatively straightforward. Right. You get some more complex tools, if you think of theory of constraints and some of the higher end Six Sigma problem solving, of course, you need real true experts to solve that. But most of the tools are pretty straightforward. What really matters is the leadership part of it. How you really understand what makes an organization tick and how you get everyone in the organization rallying around that. So since about 2008, I've been relearning what lean went. And I would guess I was on what's sometimes called Mount Stupid, on the Dunning-Kruger experience and confidence level, or expertise and confidence level. And I think I quickly crashed down Mount Stupid in 2008 and realized that I didn't know a lot of what I didn't know, and started to learn ever since. And that's been my second part of my journey.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm picturing that diagram, and maybe a lot of our listeners can as well, about Dunning-Kruger syndrome. But yeah, I mean, that label of Mount Stupid. I mean, there's clearly a difference between stupid and ignorant. I mean, it's almost more Mount Ignorance. We don't know what we don't know, and that I appreciate you sharing that, Philip, because I think that's a part, if we're being honest about it, all of our lean journeys, to some extent, of relearning or learning better, or having better coaches, better influences. So, I appreciate you, being willing to talk through that. Kaikaku is an interesting word. I don't know how it was taught to you, but more like radical improvement as opposed to Kaizen, or more incremental improvement, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk about this in all three of my books, actually, Mark, because there's often a common misconception that continuous improvement is just about Kaizen. I think often people actually use them as synonyms, continuous improvement and Kaizen as the same thing. And that breakthrough improvement is something separate. Yeah. And I really try and disabuse people of that and say, look, continuous improvement is exactly what it says on the tin. It's continuous improvement. And whether that improvement is incremental or radical breakthrough improvement, you actually need both. And that's why a really successful organization has both that Horshin-Canry policy deployment approach to making breakthroughs, and also tries to build that army of problem solvers who are every day doing those incremental changes. Yeah,
I totally agree with you. And there are a lot of organizations, while we're talking about mistakes, maybe organizations that make the mistake of only wanting large projects that only have large ROI, and okay, there's a time and a place for that, but they miss out on. I like the Toyota diagram. The Toyota Way of Field book is where I first saw it, of 3 levels of Kaizen: large rocks, smaller rocks, and tiny pebbles. A lot of people make the mistake of not doing any of the daily continuous improvement kind of Kaizen, or people only do the middle level, which is maybe the Kaizen events. I'm curious, what other reflections you have from seeing different places or different leaders only using parts of the improvement approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's pretty common, pretty standard across most companies. It's kind of I think lean leadership, or lean, is often seen as kind of a pick and mix, and it doesn't work like that. It's really a holistic model of leadership that needs to be a choice. And you need to be all in. I often use sporting, analogies or metaphors, and I say it's like choosing a fitness regime, but deciding, well, okay, I'm going to go out running, but I'm still going to drink beer every night and eat pizza. You've got to decide: are you in or are you out? You can't be kind of half into this, and so what we've tried to do, and I did this in my previous companies as well, is we create what we call the opportunity corridor, impact and difficulty. And the low impact but low difficulty are the Kaizen, and you want many of those. You want to create this, as I call it, an army of problem solvers who are every day able to solve the problems that they encounter daily. Then you've got this kind of middle group, and there's a kind of the Kaizen events, the ones where you get teams together and they try and solve some of the bigger rocks, the larger rocks.
Yeah.
And then you've got the few but really significant breakthrough projects, and those can be technology breakthroughs, investments, design, or they could be a Six Sigma DMAIC or design for Six Sigma type of activity. And you've got to do it all. It's got to all happen to really be a successful company.
Yeah, there's all those layers, but then those larger breakthrough improvements that require time and investment, that it seems like that's where you need to prioritize. I try to encourage people when it comes to the small Kaizen improvements that really don't require any spending or much time, that it might be waste to prioritize the little ones, but the big ones, like we don't have unlimited time or attention or money, right? So I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more on this idea of how to prioritize those based on organizational need.
Yeah, so I'm a great exponent of Holt. Obviously it was developed by a companies many years ago. Toyota again are famous for that. Danaher actually is probably one of the most successful at using this in the West. They've been almost ruthless in their use of Holt to prioritize and really grow their businesses. And to me, it's a great tool. Again, it's a tool. The leadership needs to come around that to actually make it successful. Too many times I walk into businesses, locations, manufacturing sites where they talk about having a Holt. You look at it and they've got 20 things on there. Where you've not got a Holt, you've got a shopping list or a wish list.
Yeah.
So it's really about that ruthless prioritization and decision and choices. And I often say to people, they say, well, if we only do 3 things, what if we do them all and we've got time to do other stuff? And I say, fantastic. How many companies end the year saying we could have done more?
Yeah.
The vast majority of organizations end the year having failed to do most of what they really wanted to do if they're honest with themselves.
Yeah. Being honest about your organizational capacity, I think, is really important. And I've seen organizations in healthcare apply this really well, of instead, looking at these big initiatives that all have their argument for why they should be done. It's not just yes, no. There's this third bucket of, well, there's yes, there's no, in between there's yes, but not now, right? That it's better to get a couple things done and then move on, instead of like this organizational, swirl, or where people point fingers and say, well, I didn't get that project done because I was pulled into this one, and somehow vice versa. Or if you have too many projects all requiring IT, well, now you've outreached the capacity of that part of the organization. These are the things that we have to talk through, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, it comes back to it's all about, like everything in lean leadership, it's about the leadership and it's about people. Yeah. And it's taking the politics out of this, getting everybody together and really doing that work. I mean, in GKN Aerospace, we started our Holt, a month or so ago. We're working busily on it now. And the idea is that every single site across our estate of 38 sites by the end of this year have got fully aligned Holt goals that are handshook with the business line president and COO, and they know exactly what they need to deliver. With really those top 3, hopefully top 3, but certainly no more than 5 priorities to deliver next year. But ones that are sizable and will make a real step change. But at the same time, back to our earlier discussion, everybody is doing the Kaizen every day, that culture of everyday improvements as well. So you get that combined power.
Yeah. So you talk about not having too many different goals, and there's the extension into not having too many high priority initiatives. How do you talk through or teach through people the concept of true north? that stays more consistent? Like the goals this year might be different than the goals next year, but True North tends to be just that, more consistent. How would you work through with an organization if they don't have a good articulation of True North?
So they need to determine one. It's you often get these arguments about, does lean work bottom up or top down? I'm a great believer it only really works if it's done from the top. So you've got to have a CEO, you've got to have a leadership team for the organization that has articulated properly what the breakthroughs are that they expect from the organization over the coming years. And then you can determine that as a strategy deployment through Horshing. So again, the key thing is Horshing isn't about the strategy. Horshing is about how you deploy the strategy and make it executable and realize it. So you've got to start with that. So again, a lot of work, and we were fortunate to have a new CEO come in last year who's been very crystal clear on what his expectations are, and that pervades throughout the organization. Everybody knows what True North is. So it's then about how are you going to achieve those results.
Yeah. And if an organization is struggling, it seems like there's one of two things that could be true. It could be the wrong strategy or the wrong strategic choices well executed, or the right strategy and priorities poorly executed. How would you kind of best diagnose a situation if it was one of the two or somehow both?
Yeah, so I think the easiest one to diagnose is the one where it's a strategy. Maybe we don't call it a bad strategy, but it's not the optimal strategy. Yeah. It's being executed well, but it isn't getting the results that the business require. That you can problem solve pretty easily, because you can say, hey, look, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's this 2x2 about results versus process. And in Horshing, we need both to be true. We need that top right-hand box. Mm-hmm. So if you're getting basically a good process, the people doing the Horshing are coming out with the right kind of output, but we're not getting the right results for the business, then something's wrong with what we're trying to achieve. That's probably easily diagnosable. In terms of, it's the right strategy, but not executed, I guess that becomes patently obvious. There's not even problem solving required. You can just see that it's not working. Mm-hmm. And again, if you're following your Horshing process, it should quickly and clearly become obvious if people aren't delivering, because there's this monthly review cycle that should pick that up early. Yeah. But again, it's, I keep coming back. I sound like a little bit of a broken record, but it all comes back to leadership. Mm-hmm. If we don't have the right leadership throughout every level of the organization, it just won't work. Yeah.
So we're going to come back and we're certainly going to talk more about leadership. Of your three books, Philip, I actually want to talk about the second one first, if that's all right with you. So the second book is The Simplicity of Lean. What are some of the ways? So, it seems like that book is a countermeasure to something. And one of those problems might be different ways people maybe overcomplicate lean or overcomplicate some of those concepts. What are some of the most common overcomplications that you've seen or experienced?
Yeah, so I think the biggest overcomplication, and again, I'll hold my hands up red-handed here, I've done this myself, is to say, look, I've got a hammer, so every problem is a nail. Mm-hmm. So you walk around, I've mentioned Horshing Cannery, and I'm absolutely passionate about it, but I shouldn't just walk into an organization and say, hey, Horshing Cannery is great, so you need to now do Horshing Cannery. One of the biggest mistakes and one of the biggest overcomplications is to go in and do lean because we should do lean. No, what we need to do is we need to make the business better, the organization better. We need to make it better for its people, the people who work there, for its customers, and for its shareholders. So we've got to make the organization better. The question is, what are the biggest problems the organization faces? Yeah. So once you start to have those conversations, you shouldn't even be talking about Lean or Six Sigma or any kind of tool at this point. The discussion should really be about what do we want to solve as a business. Once you've kind of got that and you've socialized that, and certainly at the leadership level, it's agreed, then you can start to talk about how are we going to to do this. And that's when you can start to bring lean into the fore. So that's kind of the red thread through the simplicity of lean is really about not putting the cart before the horse, really understanding what is it the business needs first, and then applying the right tools appropriately to solve that. And it really is, like I say, red-handed here. I've done this myself where I've gone in and said, hey, we've got to go do lean, and we've got this great plan and we've got this great program. And everyone says, oh, yeah, we've heard we've got to do lean. But after a few months, people turn around and say, well, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
And you even see, separate meetings for people to solve their real business problems while there's these meetings to go do this lean stuff.
Oh, gosh.
So, that's the kind of terrible. And I guess you've seen this many times in healthcare as well.
I've seen it in different settings, even, back to manufacturing days. But, I love the way you emphasize that. And I try to pass along lessons that I've learned in different ways, right? Because, people will often reach out to me and they'll ask about tools. They're at that stage in their development or their journey. You might get asked this too, Philip, of like, what should we do first? What tool should we implement first? And I try to steer it back to, kind of drawing upon, I always point to Taiichi Ono in his book on TPS. There's a chapter where the header says, start from need, right? And then later on, he makes a point about your most pressing needs, which is, exactly, that sounds like what I hear you saying. And then, even back to John Shook when he was with the Lean Enterprise Institute, what problem are we trying to solve? Was a question he would always bring up. So, it seems like if there's an opportunity or a need to use this high level lean problem solving thought process of not jumping to solutions, making sure we understand and frame the problem well. I think that's always a good reminder at the organizational level or at a much more detailed, shop floor problem kind of situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt, Mark.
Yeah. So focusing on why we're doing things and, not overcomplicating. So one other thing I was going to ask you about, because I've seen this in different settings, different ways organizations might overcomplicate problem solving for a certain situation. When I think of the last manufacturing company that I worked for, I was going through a lean training and certification track and had a project where I was supposed to solve a business problem with lean methods. Well, there's somebody next cubicle over who was going through a Six Sigma black belt track. And, and part of her certification was quite literally based on, you need to use all of these tools. And it was really slowing her down when it was not an inconsequential business problem that she was solving. So I'm not criticizing Six Sigma, but I think it comes back to the question of like being situational. What have you learned about the right level of complexity of problem solving for the right type of problem? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think the key thing here, Mark, and I recognize exactly what you're talking about here. And the key thing for me is start at the bottom level of problem solving and escalate until you've solved it. So the first thing is kind of JDI, just do it.
Yep.
So the first thing is, are we actually running to standard? So if we're not running to standard, just return to standard. Right. So that's the first check, because I've seen far too many times problems being solved. What we're actually doing is reinventing the wheel because we're not running to standard. So let's make sure, first of all, we're running to standard. And that's the first thing that we should teach in any good problem solving.
Yeah.
The next thing is 3C. So we teach very simple 3C: concern, cause, countermeasure. And it's very deliberately cause, not root cause, because you want a lot of this going on every single day. So the first time something happens, if we get a concern up, people believe they know what the cause is and they can put a countermeasure in place to quickly try and solve it, then that's good enough. Now, if it recurs, you might need to get into more complex problem solving. But the first thing is we want the first level, so that tier one of level, the operation team leader, to be trying to solve these things quickly. And if you've not solved the problem at that level, then you can go to some practical problem solving, some A3 type of problem solving, or 8D, depending on the industry and the approach you take. But essentially, a structured A3 of problem solving. if you ultimately can't solve it at that level, and generally that's when you can't really get to the root cause easily, and you don't understand why you're getting variation or performance issues, then you might escalate it to a Six Sigma type of problem solving. But again, it's go through those escalation levels. Don't just jump to one solution. And to your point about your colleague back in the manufacturing company with a black belt, I've seen that many times when, again, it's about doing the project rather than solving the business problem. And so what we've done with our Six Sigma training, both at the green belt and black belt level, we've really slimmed down the curriculum, the standard curriculum. And then the idea is that if somebody's solving a problem, if they need tools we've not yet taught them, then they pull those tools in and we teach them as they need them. And we've also got a good library, and people can kind of pull in those solutions themselves and that learning for themselves. So again, we very much focus, I would almost say fixate on, it's got to be a real business problem that the site director and their team cares about. If they really care about it, it's worth doing. If they don't care about it, we shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I love the way you say all that. I mean, it sounds like it's a shift from, like, that company I used to work for. It was easier for them to structure it as a big batch of training. We're going to do this batch certification and certify you in all of this, which then slowed down the project. Where, I mean, there were different objectives. There's learning, certification, if you decide that's important, and then the business results. What I hear you describing is, it seems like a parallel of a shift between batch to just-in-time learning. Does that mean, the certification time to certification is slower then? Is the learning and the application is happening more organically to the needs of the business?
No, our certifications are based on, is this person a good problem solver at the appropriate level? Are they solving business problems? So I'd put up our Six Sigma green belts and black belts against any Six Sigma green belt or black belt in terms of solving business problems. If we want to go and have a university academic competition, then, they may lose. But we're in the business of solving business problems, not becoming academics at this. So I think that the curriculum we've got, it's not a simplified curriculum. What we've done is we've essentially analysed the tool set and said which are the most common tools. So let's teach them really well in those fewer, more common tools, and the more esoteric tools can be pulled in when they're required, rather than, it's the Pareto principle. We're teaching them the 20% of tools that solve 80% of problems. We're not teaching them any less vigorously. We're just teaching them fewer but quicker. And then the certification, we do certification. We actually have a recertification policy as well. So you need to become certified by solving business problems of a significant size. And then 2 years later, you need to show us that you've continued to solve business problems of a significant size. And if you've not, then you don't keep the certification, because what's the point if you're not using it?
Interesting. Yeah, that was. I don't think there was a feedback loop at that previous company. I think it was like once certified, always certified. But that was a different challenge there, where particularly at the green belt level, everybody there was doing a project, and I've talked about this before in other episodes. About the organizational dynamic was, if you had 500 green belt certificates on the wall, I think the number of green belt projects was probably something like 504. Because the culture and the environment, and this comes back to leadership in a Lean Six Sigma environment, you can train and certify people and get your project knocked out. But it seemed like you're losing so much potential if people aren't given the time and space and encouragement and coaching to go use that over time. Right?
Absolutely. And we don't want, our central team are pretty small. What we're actually asking is that people who become certified as a black belt in our site, they are then the trainers of the green belts. And then we want the green belts to be the trainers of people doing practical problem solving.
Yeah.
And it should become a lifestyle, if you will.
Yeah.
Six Sigma becomes your lifestyle.
And we'll come back to living lean here before the end of the episode. But the other thing you mentioned there, Philip, I totally agree with, is starting simple. I'll give a shout out. Cleveland Clinic, I think, is a great example in healthcare, where they have a lot of smaller Kaizens, just do it's, or you could say just PDSA it's, and then they have A3s, and they'll escalate a situation to an A3 when they realize, oh, we don't really understand what's going on, and we tried a simple countermeasure. We've learned what we don't know, and then it becomes an A3. Where there's times where I've been in the difficult situation coming into an organization where they'll say something quite literally like, well, everything has to be an A3. Well, why do you think that? Why do you believe that? Well, so somebody had taught us that, right? Now they're sort of grounded in this idea of, everything needs to be an A3. And then what I see is, it's overkill. People they end up not really working on the problem when they're given, structure that's just too much, or, I feel like a heretic sometimes if, I've say, I think you were saying the same thing. You don't always need to do root cause analysis. So I'd be curious to hear your reaction to that phrase, or anything else you would have to say about, when you would just, I love, I hadn't heard this phrase, 3C, concern, cause, countermeasure, and not going to root cause. It sounds like you would agree, not always necessary.
Oh, absolutely, Mark. Yeah, I mean, to me, that's how you get that engine of problem solving on a daily basis, by not overwhelming. Especially, the operators at the end of the day, and it's one thing that I always try and get across to my team and to people we teach who are not value adders right on the shop floor, is we've got to respect the operators who are adding the value. Ultimately, they're the people who do what the customer pays for.
Yeah.
And, their time is consumed with doing that most of the time. So we need easy ways for them to solve the problems in a way that they're going to do it and not just work around it. So 3C is a very powerful tool for, hey, I've got a concern every time 1 out of 10 of these parts come out of the machine with too much swarf on them. Okay, let's knock that concern. What do you think the cause is? Quick conversation, couple of the operators, a team leader. Hey, we think it's this. Right, what do you think we could do as a countermeasure? Right, let's try that. Either do it themselves or grab the engineer and he can do a quick fix for them. And if it doesn't work, try something else the day after or in a couple of hours. But, not getting into too much A3. If it suddenly becomes something they can't solve and it's a big enough problem, then we might get the engineer and she and a couple of people might start working on an A3 to really solve the problem from a root cause perspective. Yeah. But first and foremost, just give the operators that opportunity to try and solve their own problems quickly and easily.
Mm-hmm. So that the first book we've been discussing is Philip's second book. I think I said this right the first time. I'll tempt fate and say it again. The Simplicity of Lean, Defeating Complexity, Delivering Excellence. So maybe, a final question about that book. Philip, what do you have a sort of ready standard elevator speech version if somebody says, well, hey, I've heard about this lean thing. What is that, Philip?
Yeah, so my elevator pitch is, it's about giving everybody in the organization the opportunity to do their best every day and to feel completely engaged and fulfilled by the work that they do.
That's said very simply and very clearly. So that's great. So thank you for that, Philip. And then the first book, Leading with Lean, an experience-based guide to leading a lean transformation. We talk more about leadership, but I wanted to ask you first your thoughts on the word transformation. Like that's a word that gets thrown around a lot. People talk about transformational change, transformational leadership, lean transformation. To you, how do you define transformation? Like what's the boundaries where you would say this organization isn't just quote unquote doing lean, they're being transformed? How would you describe the difference?
So for me, the reason we use transformation as the word rather than change, or transformational change rather than just simply change, is because Well, the definition for me is when it's really fully in line with the strategy of a company or an organization to be significantly different tomorrow than it is today. And if lean is aligned with that, and if lean is the vehicle to do that, then lean is being used for transformational change. Mm-hmm. So that's how I would define it.
Yeah, it seems like with that would come transformational results. We're not just a little bit better than we were last year, or a little bit better than we were 5 years ago, that you see a huge leap in performance. I mean, the first example of that I saw in my time at General Motors, the plant I worked at was literally at the bottom of the GM global rankings for quality and productivity. Predictable results with the old predictable style of leadership. But then we had a lean leader come in. He was one of the original GM NUMMI people. Difference in leadership style and leadership behaviors. I saw a lot of improvement that first year. I'd left to go to grad school, but within a couple of years, that plant was top quartile. I would say that was transformational results right there. Like, what are some examples of transformational results that you would see or expect to see as a result of that alignment, that transformation in leadership and culture and improvement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got to be looking from basically the way I always look at our key performance indicators, which are ultimately how we should measure the performance of the business, are around people, engagement of people, and that can be measured through kind of the conventional engagement surveys like a Gallup engagement, but also in terms of how many Kaizen per person per month are you seeing, how many hazards solved. Then you've got safety. Are you seeing a significant change in the performance from a safety perspective? So, zero accidents has to be the goal of a company that really wants to transform. Okay. Yeah. And you've got to come down that Heinrich triangle or pyramid down to the bottom and really maximize the number of hazards solved. You're going to see quality improve significantly. It's going to be first time right culture. You're going to see delivery where it's just right on time every time. You're going to see cash reduced in terms of the working capital that you need to invest to get it, because you're going to reduce your value stream lead times by getting it right first time with high quality. And then ultimately what's going to come out the other end is lower cost. And what you'll notice is that I deliberately put them in that order.
Right.
Look after your people in a safe environment with high quality to deliver on time to customers at a reduced working capital level equals lower cost to serve.
Yeah. Yeah.
And often lean's used the other way around, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so it comes back to that question of, is it mistaken understanding of lean, or are we just doing altogether different things and labeling it lean? Like back to the thing you were bringing up earlier, this idea of a system, whether it's 14 points of the Toyota way, if you pick and choose a couple of those points, or we're going to do all these lean things, but we're not going to embrace point number one about long-term thinking. Like, you're doing a lot of things, but should you be labeling that lean any more than, let's say, I would say, I'm following the keto diet. I eat lots of bacon cheeseburgers, but I still eat buns. Like, well, that's not the keto diet. Why would you be calling it that? And why would you be expecting? Then you might say, like, oh, I'm doing the keto diet and I'm not losing weight. Well, yeah, because you're not doing the keto diet. There's similar things that happen with lean if people are really doing cost cutting, but they're calling it lean. That's very different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I often joke in my first book, I coined the term, people often think of lean as less employees are needed.
Yeah, we've all heard that. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's, and I say lean really should be about leadership, excellence, analysis, and know. And that's the intelligent know. So,
yeah.
We've got, and the reason I write my books, the reason I do things like this when I'm talking with you, Mark, and, I'm passionate about changing the mindset because it has such great impact, and it is transformational on an organization and its people when it's done right.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned safety, because even back in the auto industry, I learned, it was often articulated SQDC, safety, quality, delivery, cost. And as you said, cost being an end result of better safety, better quality, better delivery, where the cost cutters might hurt quality, delivery, and safety in the name of cost cutting. So then we're worse off. But I'm glad you mentioned even the idea of zero accidents as a goal. First off, that pyramid that Philip referred to, if you're not familiar with it, talks about not just reacting to, let's say, deaths, or lower in the pyramid, serious injuries, or other injuries, near misses, and risks. We want to be identifying risks and reacting even to near misses in the name of improving safety, right, Philip? What else would you say about sort of focusing on the bottom part of that pyramid, as you mentioned?
Yeah, it's about creating, having a value creating safety culture. And it's really about, we want to help everyone to see. We talk about learning to see from a waste walk perspective, but this is learning to see hazards and really having a very low tolerance for unsafe conditions. And one of the key elements of our lean operating model in GKN Aerospace, and one of the Horsham targets for this year, has been behavioral based safety, which is a way of teaching and training people how to be and behave in a safe way that is about spotting those hazards up front. Mm-hmm. We even talk about, we want people to go home in a better state than they came to work. Mm-hmm. Not even just in the same state. We want them to come home in a better state. And that it's a mindset. It's a changing mindset, and it's big. I mean, you get a lot of resistance to it, because there are people who've been ground into with both safety and quality, and I think they're two sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. I think it's a very similar mindset, and they've been ground in that behavioural idea that safety and quality cost money, right, instead of they actually create value. And I'm very much on the they create value side of the coin. Yeah,
it's that old trade-offs thinking, and so much of what you just said there in the last couple of minutes reminds me of what Paul O'Neill said when he was CEO at Alcoa, where they had learned from Toyota. They had what they called the Alcoa production system, later the Alcoa business system. But Paul O'Neill, as a leader, said the goal is zero harm, and he heard him say that same phrase, that the goal evolved to be you should go home healthier than when you arrived. And there's a certain culture, and as you said earlier, it starts with the CEO, right? Paul O'Neill would teach people, nope, these are false trade-offs. Better quality doesn't cost more. That's an old mindset in healthcare. People say the same things, like, oh, sure, we'd love to have better quality, but we can't afford it. Well, yes, you can if you go about things in a lean way. So I'm really happy to hear those same thoughts, being part of your approach, and whenever that's how it is at other companies. That's just always great to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, there's an old habit around trade-offs. There's an old habit, people will make excuses like, well, it's sad, but injuries are bound to happen. That was something Paul O'Neill challenged. So I was going to ask one other question about lean leadership here. It's one thing to sort of try to explain or demonstrate what lean leadership is. What have you learned about helping people unlearn old mindsets, old habits, old behaviors, so they can then embrace lean?
Yeah, that's really a beautiful question, Mark, because that's been one of my real educations in this. I'm an engineer, so I come from the side of PDCA logic. Mm-hmm. Why do people not understand it? And I've learned over the past few years, it's very much about getting people's hearts, capturing their imagination, really understanding what's in it for them and what will help them. And one of the models that's really helped, we all know the Deming-Schuhart PDCA model, right. But we've adopted over the past couple of years the Bovis BTFA model: believe, think, feel, and act. And I've incorporated that in my third book. It's that important to me now. And that's really about helping people emotionally to understand why we're doing something and to understand what drives them. And that's been one of the biggest things about how do we help people to unlearn behavior. People are doing it for a reason. Sure. They believe something which drives their thinking, which they get a reaction on, and they experience things that makes them feel a certain way, and they therefore act a certain way. And what we've got to do is we've got to get in there somehow to show them that a new way of working gets a result that makes them feel better. Yeah. And once they start to feel better about it, they'll start to think differently. They'll start to believe different things, and they'll start to act in a different way. Yeah. So that's really what a lot of the emphasis is on. And, in my team and beyond my team in the sites now, you hear people talk about BTFA. It's part of our training materials. We've got something in our materials called the psychology of change. So we're really trying to drive this up and motor really in terms of how we help people to behave and think differently.
Yeah. And so then when we think differently, this comes to your third book, we can live differently. That third book, I'm going to say it right this time, I think, Leading Lean by Living Lean, changing how you lead, not who you are. Well, so I'd love to hear the story of how this book came to be, because you write more about personal benefits from lean, both at work and at home.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions I got off people, who'd read the books, and also people who I work with, people in my team and peers and colleagues, is, how do you get so much done, Philip, but you never seem to be kind of, doing the 70, 80-hour weeks, and you have a smile on your face, even when you've had a long travel week where you've been flying to the west coast of the US and you're back, and you'll come on a meeting on Friday afternoon after you've got back off the flight and you've got a smile on your face. What's going on? Why? How can you do this? And I started to think about it and talk to people, and I'd done a couple of presentations to companies and to other people, and people just said, look, you need to write this down. You need to put this in your third book. You need to tell us how you do this. So that's how it came about. And it's really because in my own personal reflection, what we call hindsight, that's been the key driver of how I've changed my behavior, how I've changed how I lead. And I've not changed who I am. I'm somebody, as I said, I'm from the Manchester area. I've got my own accent, my own background, my own cultural beliefs that have driven who I am. But at the same time, I've learned to change to be a different leader. And I've done that by living the lean behaviors. And, there's so many people I've coached who might have the job title lean expert or lean master or continuous improvement leader, who are overwhelmed. And sometimes I can sound a little bit unsympathetic because, I'll say, look, this isn't acceptable. Don't tell me you're a lean expert and then tell me that you're overwhelmed, you can't keep up with your email and you can't keep up with your workload.
Those are problems to be solved, right?
Those are problems to be solved, absolutely. This is like going to a doctor who sat there, is, 10 times overweight, sat smoking a cigarette, drinking a glass of whiskey, and telling you need to lose weight and stop smoking and stop drinking. It's about solving the problems that are getting in our way. So, my last book, Leading Lean by Living Lean, is really how do you become that great leader you want to be by living the concepts yourself, reducing the burden on yourself, reducing the burden on your family, your friends, your social life, and creating what I call a life in balance. I really hate the term work-life balance, because to me, work-life balance implies that you've got this great thing called life, and then you've got this horrible thing called work. Yeah. And you've got to reduce the amount of time at work and maximize the time that you're at life. So basically, it says you're wasting your life when you're in work. and I don't believe that. What I believe is work is an integral part of a positive life. Right. And a life in balance embraces it and makes sure that you've got every part of your life how you want it to be. And that's what my book's about. How do you create that? How do you achieve that nirvana, if you will?
Yeah. So there's and as you shared, Philip, your reflections about shifting from tools focus to leadership focus. There's opportunities then, it seems, in our home life. Like I see times where people will share, here's examples of me using lean tools at home. I'm like, hey, if that solves a problem for you, if that works for you, well, great. But it sounds like you're not just focused on here's 5S for the kitchen pantry, or a Kanban system for buying more toilet paper. There's more to it than the lean tools at home, right?
Oh, absolutely. This is about doing what works for you to reduce your time. So, it starts with mindset. Again, it starts with belief. I do a very simple mathematics equation on, working 40 hours instead of working 52 hours a week, but reducing the waste that means you're working 52 hours a week, so that you get exactly the same amount of value added done in 40 hours as you would in 52. And it gives you 12 hours a week that you can choose what you want to do with. And it's not up to me what people do with that. Maybe they want to spend that 12 hours working again, but maybe they can work on something that's about the future instead of just fixing what's going on at the moment. Or maybe they want to spend that 12 hours with the children, 12 hours with their friends, playing chess, whatever they want to do. But it's about how do we take it out. So it's just like the discussions we've had about starting with problems. What is the problem for a business? What's your problem? What's your personal problem or problems that you want to solve? Is it not having enough time with the family? Is it not having enough time to learn tennis? What is it? And also the side effect is you'll become a role model at work as well. And I think that I wouldn't be in the position I am now as a senior vice president if I hadn't been able to become the leader that I've become by living lean. That's the premise.
Yeah. Well, thank you for Philip, and thank you for that, and thank you for everything you've shared. Just one of the last thing we had talked about this before we started recording is we were trying to turn off devices that make noise, and a lot of this is from push notifications. We often say in lean frameworks, we'd say, push of materials is bad, pull is good. There's a little bit more nuanced view. I've heard people say, flow when you can, pull when you must, or sometimes there's. I'm stating this really badly. There's a time and a place, even if push isn't the ideal. Sometimes a little bit of push can fit into the context of a lean system. So that was a really badly formed question around push notifications versus pulling for information. Tell us about some of the settings and the way you manage some of your devices there, Philip.
Yeah, so in terms of notifications from email, social media, WhatsApp, etc., I don't have those pinging. I don't have those making noises. The only thing that makes a noise on my phone is a phone call. Yeah. And on my work laptop, it's if somebody calls me on Teams. Yeah. Everything else is on a pull system. I go take a look at my email when my leader standard work tells me it's time to go take a look at my email. I go take a look at LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, but I look at it at the times that suit me and that fit in with my leader standard work. So, it's very much about a pull system on that. And if somebody needs me, they can call me, and my team, my colleagues know if they give me a call, I'll always pick up if I can. If I can't, I'll call them back. So again, it's about taking control. It's not about ignoring. And I think a lot of the problem with many time management tactics nowadays they're about how do you ignore what's going on, and that doesn't reduce the psychological burden. Yeah. To reduce the psychological burden, you need to be in control of the stresses.
Or, take control back. As we wrap up, I think of something you said just a little while ago. If someone's complaining that they're overwhelmed by all of those notifications, that's a problem to be solved. Like, for me, it's iPhone. Go into your settings. Like, I'm pretty aggressive about not letting many apps give me notifications for that same reason. And turning off, like on my iPad, there's no notifications because I don't use the iPad in a way that would invite any sort of urgent interrupty sort of message. I'm reading in the Kindle app in my iPad, and so if I haven't completely solved the problem, I've implemented some Kaizens in my own management of these devices.
Yeah, precisely.
Small improvements, no root cause analysis, but we made it better. So, Philip, I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your day. This is not part of your usual leader standard work to be a guest on a podcast, I'm guessing.
No, it's not, but I leave enough time to do this.
Well, I'm glad that you did. I hope people will go check out Philip's books and see there's one of those noisemakers popping up and getting me of a reminder for something. So I apologize for that. But go check out Philip's books. You can find them on Amazon and other booksellers. His website is lean-master.com. And again, there'll be a link in the show notes. So Philip, thank you for sharing, so many great stories and reflections and insights today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And thank you for having me, Mark. It's a privilege. Thank you.